Testing, testing. Can you guys hear me? Can everybody hear me okay?
We good? Okay, okay. Okay, got you. Matter and other organizations we will mention as we go along as we prepare for this historic Senate hearing on modern day voting discrimination in Alabama. Just for the record, my name is Reverend Mark Thompson. I'm a member of the board of the Selma Bridge Crossing Jubilee, beginning my 25th year in that process, also the host of Make It Plain. And very proud to say this is one of my family homes. My grandfather in the early 70s was the vice president of Alabama State University. And my family roots begin in the place in question when we talk about voting rights. My great-great-grandmother was born in Selma in 1858. And so there is blood tied in to the struggle around Bloody Sunday and the fight for voting rights, which is ongoing. We want to be sure everyone is invited to come to Selma during the course of the weekend. I want to quote one of our speakers who will come later, Sister Leslie Prohl, who reminded me, Mark, I'm always here, and I even come in the off years. Some folk only come when it's a 0 at the end of the anniversary or a 5, but this is the 59th, so you get special gold stars for being here in an off year. Amen? So we're thankful to everyone for being here. Without ado, we want to hear from some of our most esteemed voting rights organizations, some of our voting rights legacy organizations, in fact, and some who are responsible for applying the pressure that the Senate would even be here. That didn't just happen organically on its own. We have to organize to make sure that happens. And so we'll begin, and we want to remind all the speakers, I have an immediate supervisor and boss in this, the communications director for Black Voters Matter, Kayla Haynes, and she has instructed me under threat of pain that this will be 2 minutes for everyone. So intimidated as I am, I will see to it that I hold everyone to that. We'll begin with one of the individuals who also helped to apply that pressure for this hearing to happen, and hopefully this will not be the last of field hearings that need to be held in other places around the country. Amen. We welcome now the founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition, the president and founder, Attorney Barbara Arnwine, our dear friend. Please welcome Barbara.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And I am sorry that my co-leader, Darrell Jones, cannot be here, but he's one of those many people stranded. So he's driving, and others are just stranded. So we know that this room would look different if we didn't have that problem. I just want to take a moment really quickly to welcome the president of the National Bar Association, Dominique Calhoun, who heard about this morning and said, I'm coming. So thank you so much. And I just have to say a big hearty welcome to one of the most amazing litigators in our country, Brenda Wright, with the Legal Defense Fund now, and very much. And, of course, a lot of love to Carla Jervison and to so many others who are here for all of your great work. Today is an historic day because we are on the road towards passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We are on the road towards passage of the Freedom to Vote Act. We will not stop until those things are accomplished. Today, some 59 years after bloody sacrifice, over 60 years after the bloody sacrifice of Cheney, Goodman, and Swerner, 59 years after the Pettus Bridge and Bloody Sunday, we are still forced to fight for voting rights because of the unrelenting opposition of the anti-democracy forces in our country. The same forces that sought in 1966 to invalidate the Voting Rights Act in the Kassenbach case are the same forces that are rising up again in the 8th Circuit and in the 11th Circuit all over this country, yelling and screaming that there is no private right of action under the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. How ironic, right? Because remember, what did Roberts say in the Shelby case, everybody? He said, Section 5, there's really this 4B problem with the coverage formula. But don't worry, because there's still Section 2. But now they're saying no such thing. No Section 2 does not exist, will not be there. But in the Georgia case, people, they've gone beyond saying there's no private right of action. They're now saying that the entirety of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. It's not congruent, is their argument that they're now making in the courts. We started with 14 crazy adverse state attorney generals saying this in the 8th Circuit case. Now we're up to 22 saying it. This is the new rise of a new Confederacy. We need the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Today, when we hear about all the current voting discrimination, vicious, ugly, going around this country, and especially right here in Alabama, we know that our work is before us. But the one thing everybody should know is we will not stop. Not for 1 second will we stop until we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Thank you.
All right. Attorney Barbara Arnwine, Transformative Justice Coalition. Thank you, Barbara. We welcome now, representing the Workers' Circle, an organization that a new partnership has just begun with, and we're all very proud of that, the CEO of the Workers' Circle, Ann Toback. Please welcome Ann. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you to our partners, Black Voters Matter And thank you, Reverend Thompson. So as introduced, I'm the CEO of the Workers' Circle. The Workers' Circle is an intergenerational activist community rooted in Jewish culture and working for a multicultural, multiracial democracy. A century ago, our Eastern European immigrant founders came to the United States fleeing persecution and seeking the rights and protections of a democracy. In 1900, at the same time as our founders arrived, harsh Jim Crow laws, brutal white supremacist violence, exploitative working conditions, and a Congress that refused to change this vicious reality for millions were taking their toll in Black lives and livelihoods. Yet from factory floors to lunch counters to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, on buses, in fields, and at courthouses, courageous Black Americans reached out to newer Jewish immigrants like us and to Americans of all backgrounds who believed in our fundamental equality enshrined in the Constitution. Our collective power and the sacrifice of countless courageous people ultimately forced the federal government to live up to its obligation to end Jim Crow and ensure voting rights for all. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was the most impactful achievement of that struggle. For 50 years, the Voting Rights Act was supported by a bipartisan majority in Congress. But in 2013, extremist Supreme Court justices cut the heart out of the law, and states began passing laws to restrict the vote and target voters of color. We cannot and we will not accept this new Jim Crow in America. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act will restore the Voting Rights Act's protections. Today, we're here putting Congress on notice. We will not give up. We will not turn back until you pass this bill and ensure that every American can vote freely without discrimination or suppression. That's your duty, and we, the people, are here to hold you accountable today, tomorrow, and until you do your jobs. Thank you.
Thank you to Ann. All right. Next, we welcome to the microphone the Deputy Director of Alabama Forward, Deanna Fowler. Deanna, please give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deanna Fowler, as of this morning, Interim Director of Alabama Forward, the state's progressive, pro-democracy civic engagement table. And I stand before you today representing a network of over 40 organizations that, in many ways, serve as the last line of defense in the fight to protect voters' interests in Alabama. For the past 24 days, our network has been fervently battling an onslaught of horrible, harmful legislation, from bills like SB 1, which aims to criminalize our work to assist voters in gaining access to absentee ballots, to those that chip away at the right to learn properly, express freely, be whole and well, and simply navigate life as our authentic selves. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Senator Butler for bringing about today's hearing and shining a light on this decades-long fight to protect all Alabamians' right to have their voices heard. All these years later, our state continues to be an incubator for bad policy that becomes a blueprint for those across the country who aspire to silence marginalized communities and progressive voices. Our people are tired. Our people are angry. But our people are also ready to continue standing in the gap for those communities we fight for and pushing back against these continued attempts to strip away their rights. We will not be silenced, and we will not be stopped. Instead, we will continue to keep fighting until this great state of Alabama is truly great for all of its people. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. And now, one of the co-founders of the organization that has convened this particular event and has been leading us in such an urgent way the past few years. They have definitely made a difference throughout the South and elsewhere. That is our favorite organization, Black Voters Matter. Please welcome the co-founder, LaTosha Brown.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. I wanted to start in the same spirit of those that have actually opened up and led the way for us to be 59 years later, and we're still dealing with this question: will America be the democracy that we desire and we deserve? And we have an answer. The answer is yes. If we got to drag her kicking and screaming, she's going to make it there at some point. And so part of our work today, I'm so happy to be with my colleagues and share this space and this stage with them. But as our theme says for Black Voters Matter, we fight back. That this is a moment that we're going to change the trajectory of this country. We're going to change the trajectory of this state. I'm a native of Alabama. I'm a daughter of the Black Belt. And here it is that in the same state that my grandmother and my grandfather, most of their lives, were denied the right to vote, that what we're seeing is the same kind of archaic laws that are literally trying to seat themselves back into preventing our people from having access to the ballot. And what's most egregious about it is that we're seeing literally an attack on making sure the racial discrimination that is enshrined within the law. Here we have a state that is the leaders of this state that are so defiant that even when that you have a right-wing conservative Supreme Court that has to say, y'all are a little too racist, right? And so in this space, I'm raising that because I think it's really important for us to recognize that part of the argument of the stripping in the Shelby decision was centered around it was no longer needed, that we didn't need the Shelby decision anymore. Everything was fine and okay. We see just in this year that even under a court order, even under an order from the Supreme Court, that we've seen the Alabama legislature take a defiant position on literally being able to make sure that African-American voters are not punished, that they're not punitive measures, that we don't have access and representation in this state. And so we've got unfinished business, and that's why we're here today. We're really happy that we're having this U.S. Senate hearing today because we'll be able to get things on the record of some of the egregious things that are happening and taking place. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. I want to save space for my colleagues up here, but there's just three quick things that I want us to remember. One is the fight is not over. Say the fight is not over. The fight is not over. Number two, that America will be the democracy that we desire and that we deserve. Amen? And number three, in order for us to get it there, we're going to have to do the work. We're going to have to shift the entire paradigm in this country. That we're not going back and we're not going to keep fighting old fights. We're going to move forward because we have a vision that's better and brighter and bigger in this country around how we see and how we believe that all of the people of Alabama, all the people in this nation deserve to make sure that they have equal and fair access to the ballot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Latasha. Next, we'll hear from the State Policy Director for Alabama of another one of our great organizations, the Southern Poverty Law Center, Mr. Jerome Dees.
First, let me say it is an absolute honor to be here with such distinguished representatives. It's also an honor to be here in a place less than a mile from where I graduated high school. As son of Alabama, son of Montgomery, it's an honor to be able to serve the people of Alabama as the State Director for Southern Poverty Law Center. We shall overcome. These words are not just song lyric. They're not a phrase that's just going to be chanted in a couple of days as we march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They are the spirit and ethos of a people. They are the spirit and ethos of a people who have gone through struggle. And you cannot go through struggle or you cannot overcome unless there has been a struggle. And when there is struggle and you work through that, on the other side is resilience. The people of Alabama have demonstrated a spirit of resilience for generations, and in the present time, they've demonstrated that spirit over the past 11 years since the Supreme Court's Shelby versus Holder decision. In the wake of that decision, we immediately saw draconian laws requiring voter IDs. We saw the closure of DMV offices across the state, the places where you're supposed to go to get those voter IDs. And this very year, that resilience was rewarded this past summer by the Milligan decision. But what did we see in the wake of that decision? This very month, in the halls of the state capitol, we're just a couple of days away from the passage of SB 1, a bill that will criminalize assistance in filling out absentee ballot applications. But one thing I saw while we were there was a spirit of resilience. We saw dozens of people from Madison on down to Malbus, Alabama, from Atmore to Ardmore, showing up at the State House and demanding their right to speak. So while we faithfully fight to overcome oppression, we come together in a righteous coalition to ring forth a clarion call to the nation's citadel, crying, now is the time for reinforcement. Now is the time for reinstatement. Now is the time for restoration of the Voting Rights Act. An act that served generations so nobly before, but it is time that we strengthen it and modernize it so that it can continue to serve the generations to come. This could not be more important. It could not be more urgent. So we are grateful to Senator Butler for coming down here to Montgomery and hearing from some of our present-day freedom fighters. And we hope that impressed upon her is the persistent and pervasive race discrimination in voting rights that we're facing. But we also hope that she is instilled with the same intractable purpose to preserve access to the franchise. And most of all, we hope that she's inspired by the fact that here in Alabama, we are bruised but unbowed. We are bullied but not beaten. We are bent but not broken. And together, we shall overcome.
Thank you, Jerome. And now, the convener of the South Alabama Black Women's Roundtable, Letitia Jackson.
Good afternoon. I was actually called to represent Melanie Campbell, who is the president and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, one of the nation's oldest civil rights organizations, who is also caught up in the travel storm, delayed travel. Greetings from Melanie, and thank you all for being here. It is fitting that Senator Butler is having the hearing here because you are sitting in the middle of the new 2nd Congressional District. The 2nd Congressional District that is only possible because we fought all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to get this district. And as you have already heard, even after we fought, and I was a plaintiff in that case, but even after we fought all the way to the Supreme Court, the legislature still defied that order, and this district that you're sitting in had to be drawn by a special master order by the court. So we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, Voting Rights Advancement Act now more than ever. Because as they said, and as you've already heard, when they stripped Section 5 out of the Voting Rights Act, they said we had Section 2. Well, we got this district under Section 2, but as you've also already heard, Section 2 is under attack. And one state has already ruled it unconstitutional. And our case is going to be litigated again next year. It's not over. It still has to be litigated. So we need these two pieces of legislation that we're talking about, and that's the subject of this hearing now more than ever. And again, as you've all also already heard, 59 years later, and as of Sunday, going into 60 years, we are still fighting for voting rights. So we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It gets twisted in my tongue. Now more than ever, and we must continue to push for that. It started in Alabama. It's going to continue. We all know that it starts in Alabama and moves across the country, but as you also have already heard, because everybody's already said everything that needs to be said, we are resilient. We are continuing to fight. We are a supermajority, but math does not change, and we are changing the demographics of this state. So keep your eyes on Alabama, because we will win this fight.
And now let's hear from the National Director of Campaigns and Field Programs of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Camille Winbush. Please welcome. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. I'm here on behalf of our President and CEO, Damon Hewitt. I bring greetings from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. I am Camille Winbush, the National Director of Campaigns and Field Programs, and I'm here to say the struggle for voting rights was really hard fought and hard won. It was 59 years ago that marchers were on that bridge trying to struggle to be seen. They were struggling to be heard, and they were there to make sure that their right to vote was actually recognized. The Constitution had given them full rights and privileges under the United States citizenship to be full citizens, to be able to have the right to vote. And yet for 100 years almost, the South just brazenly denied them the right to vote. They did it through a number of nefarious tactics, discriminatory voting practices, things like literacy tests, grandfather clauses, poll taxes, all-white primaries. And when all of that failed, they resorted to violence and intimidation. And so the passage of the Voting Rights Act was actually spurred by all of that bloodshed, the tears, the struggles of the voting rights movement and the civil rights movement broadly. And so they brought Congress to bear, and they passed the Voting Rights Act, which was actually tremendously important and impactful. After the Voting Rights Act of 1965, states that had previously discriminated against black people with just outright abandonment were then pre-cleared. They had to get pre-clearance to stop them from enacting discriminatory voting practices. And so that meant that states like Alabama and Florida and Georgia and Mississippi could no longer deny black people their full right under the law. After the passage of the Shelby decision, when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, we saw a wave of massive voter suppression take hold of this country. We see it in cuts to early voting. We see it in bans to drop boxes. We see it in attacks on souls to the polls. We see it in a number of ways, just trying to make it so that black people don't have the conveniences and safety and being able to exercise the right to vote. And so that's why we need this Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to really restore those full rights under the law. And we're here to call on Congress to do their job, and we need all of us here in this room to continue to band together, because it's with the people and our power that we make Congress move. Thank you.
Thank you to Camille. Now representing another one of our longstanding legacy organizations, LDF, the Legal Defense Fund, the Senior Policy Counsel, Jared Evans. Please welcome Jared.
Thank you, Reverend Mark. I first bring you greetings on behalf of Janae Nelson, the President, Director, Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She will be here tomorrow to join us for the rest of the weekend. I first want to thank Senator Butler and all the leaders for bringing us here, bringing the Senate Judiciary Committee to Alabama, and not just any place in Alabama, but on the campus of a historically black college and university. As a two-time HBCU graduate myself, I'm always excited to be on the campus of an HBCU. And I also want to thank all of the partners and coalition members who worked so hard over the past year for yesterday's introduction of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Yesterday was truly an historic and momentous occasion. You know, I always land here in Montgomery with a certain level of reverence and awe and respect. We are standing in the birthplace of democracy for black people in America. The Legal Defense Fund played a pivotal role in ensuring that the foot soldiers were able to proceed from Selma to Montgomery, and the march was able to proceed as planned following the events of Bloody Sunday. LDF, along with our co-counsel, we filed a lawsuit, actually, against the governor at the time, George Wallace, in a case some of you may have heard of, Williams v. Wallace. We filed a detailed proposed plan for the march from Brown Chapel in Selma to the state capitol here in Montgomery on behalf of Hosea Williams and John Lewis. And 6 months later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed in direct response to the activism and national awareness raising surrounding Bloody Sunday and the Selma to Montgomery March. LDF is proud to have played such a direct role in the struggle for voting rights and to continue to defend against modern-day voter suppression. This fall, as a result of years of litigation, including before the Supreme Court, Black voters in Alabama will have the opportunity to elect their preferred candidate in 2 out of 7 congressional districts. I want to thank Letitia Jackson and Alabama Forward for being plaintiffs in that case. Thank you. In Louisiana, where we also sued for an additional Black congressional district, just last month, Governor Landry finally signed a map into law that will create another additional Black district, ending 2 years of protracted litigation. And finally, we are anxiously awaiting a decision from the Supreme Court in our South Carolina redistricting case. All of these victories are made possible by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which must be fully restored and strengthened. Congress has the power to do this by passing the Voting Rights Advancement Act, one of the most consequential and impactful civil rights laws in our nation's history. Thank you again to Senator Butler and the leaders who made this possible, and we look forward to today's hearing. Thank you.
And our last speaker before questions also represents one of our legacy organizations, LCCR. Let me just, another point of privilege in terms of family. One of the leaders of the Leadership Conference of Civil Rights back in the day, who was a member of my extended family through marriage, Clarence Mitchell Jr. And we are resurrecting the effort to have a bust of Clarence Mitchell Jr. in the Capitol within the next year. So you'll be hearing about that, working with the family, the immediate family on that, and we look forward to that happening. So here to represent the organization he served for almost 30 years, the Leadership Conference, is Leslie Prohl, the Senior Director for Voting Rights at LCCR.
Thank you so much. So as Mark said, the Leadership Conference is the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization, and we work to make America live up to its ideals. I am honored to join this illustrious crowd of activists and advocates, and I'm glad to be back at ASU. I started my career in Birmingham litigating voting rights cases. It was challenging then, but we had the full protection of the Voting Rights Act back then, and we certainly don't do that now. And you know, I don't want to talk about all of the damage that Shelby has done. We know it, we live it, we litigate it, we battle it. But I want to encourage us to do something, because we tend to talk about the last bad bill, the bill that's going on criminalizing voter assistance in Alabama. We also need to talk about the cumulative harm that this has caused to individual voters. That year after year, you have bills passing in different forms of discrimination, which are operating over time to constrict the vote in every way. And we need to call attention, not just look what they did last year, look what they've done for the last 10, 11 years, and how it has impacted voters. We urgently need relief. I absolutely agree with you. And I want to say something about yesterday. We've been introducing the John Lewis bill before, right, everybody? We've been through this. But yesterday was really extraordinary and gives me a lot of hope. First, our commitment has not wavered. We all know that. But look who joined us in the fight yesterday. We had a coalition of 225 organizations support the bill. 50 unions got on, okay? We had interfaith organizations, we had Black women's organizations, sororities, we had environmental groups, we had LGBT groups, we had reproductive groups, and everybody was talking about their recognition that the right to vote is foundational and is the protection for all our rights and freedoms, and that the pathway to meaningful change on any issue is through the ballot. And that gave me a lot of hope. And let me also say something. I've been doing this a long time. To have a bill introduced yesterday and to have a Senate hearing today in Alabama on modern-day voting discrimination, that has never happened, okay? So this is, we're seeing a lot of momentum here, okay? And I'm deeply grateful to Senator Butler for making the move, saying, I'm coming down, I want to be there for Selma. This is going to be terrific. And then I want to conclude by saying that I know a lot of us were there. 4 years ago, many of us were fortunate enough to be marching on the bridge when all of a sudden the crowd stopped, right? We were like frozen. We didn't know what was going on. And it was like, what's happening? We're like, going up. And all of a sudden, as if appearing out of nowhere, John Lewis rises up on a stool that they had given him, and a very ailing John Lewis. And he told us, never give in, never give up. And I'm here to say, as we have all said, we are not giving up. We are not giving up until the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, AKA the John Lewis Bill, we don't have to say the whole title, the Freedom to Vote Act, and the Native American Voting Rights Act. Okay? This is a divine message. Becomes the law of the land. Thank you.
Jared, I think you said D.C. statehood too. Well, you just said, yeah. Amen. Amen. Director Haynes, am I recognizing press, or are you? Or okay. Anyone from the press have a question? And please direct it at whichever panelist you'd like to answer. And please tell us where you're from.
Do you think that, the passage of these bills that have pretty much silenced the voices of some of our voters kind of tie into the voter apathy that we have been also experiencing? So anybody can answer that question.
Let me just remind everybody on time that the hearing starts in about 10 minutes, so we have 3 minutes here.
And y'all can come up to the microphone.
I'll attempt to be brief, but absolutely, yes. It's not just SB1 that is going to affect turnout this coming Tuesday in the primary. It's a host of different bills that you're seeing this year, as well as in previous legislative sessions. Bills like SB 129 that are colloquially referred to as the anti-DEI bill, or previously the anti-CRT bill. Things like that directly impact voters' education and their ability to understand what has taken place in Alabama history and American history. And when you don't know where you've come from, it directly impacts how you're able to move forward. There are a host of different bills that deal with the criminal justice system in Alabama. We've seen a host of bills dealing with criminalization of homelessness. There are bills that are geared towards lowering the age for youthful offender eligibility. So that directly ties into how large the voting base is and stripping people of that right to vote. So it's a whole host of different things that are directly tied to the voting levels that we're seeing today.
Any other media with questions? Going once, going twice. We thank everyone for being here. Stay tuned for more information. I do believe the hearing itself will be streamed and will be on C-SPAN. This is historic. For those of you watching online and or in the audience, please also visit selmajubilee.com to see the entire schedule of events this weekend, which includes, I'm speaking for the Jubilee, is a nonpartisan organization, a candidates forum for this new district. The candidates will be in Selma on Sunday evening after the bridge. So we look forward to that historic opportunity as well. Thank you. Please give all of our speakers a round of applause. Please applaud themselves.